Greetings, this is Bradford, Donald Keller Townsend, and this is a forward research report on energy returned, on energy investment of different fuels and the implications for society, energy policy, part 2, going over an older paper by Charles A.S. Hall, Jessica G. Lambert, and Stephen B. Balogh. I don't know how to pronounce some of the names. I don't know if it's French pronunciation Lambert or English Lambert, if it's Stephen or Stefan, Stephen or Stephan. But I want to go down to where I was before to an important. This is figure 2, mean, EROI, and standard errors. That's what these bars are here, standard error bars. Values for thermal fuels based on known published values. Values are derived by using known, modern, and historical published EROI and energy analysis assessments, and values published by Dale 2010, see Lambert et al. 2012. For a detailed list of references. Note, please see text for discussion, as all these values should not necessarily be taken at face value. In general, philosophically, people who don't show high degrees of certitude are your wise people. Demagogues, people who are trying to mind control average and below average intelligent people by showing confidence and loud voice when they speak, that show a high degree of certitude, can get large amounts of followers from the masses. I'm not intending my audience to be the average people. I'm hoping they're a little more educated and intelligent. Minority is who I'm. If I can hit one or two people, then they can go on and influence hundreds of others, or even beyond that, as their smaller microcosm spheres of influence. And I enjoy doing it, and I think the same information needs to have multiple outlets or sources for the knowledge to be disseminated, and this is just one more source of that. So this one shows the highest EROI is coal, then oil and gas means natural gas, and these are world averages. So that includes high EROI places such as Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iran, where they have traditional conventional oil, where you have an oil well that goes kind of straight down into a large aquifer, or not an aquifer, but a reservoir of oil, maybe hundreds of meters below the surface, and then the pressure of that just comes up the pipe. They have, it takes not very much infrastructure, and they can build pipelines which are very efficient to get it to refineries. And then you also would have in there real low quality or low EROI Venezuelan swamp oil is what I like to call it. Tar sands there in Alberta, Canada region, and hydraulic fracturing. So all that would be averaged in, and with that you maybe come in there in the low 20s. Tar sands, I think the consensus is maybe 3.5 EROI. It is positive, but it's actually below 4, which is considered worthy of, if it's below 4 energy return on invested, the project is generally deemed not worthwhile as far as benefiting society as a whole. Oil shale is a little higher. Let's just say that it's at 8. And ethanol is down there. They have it from biomass. I've seen it as being below It's an energy sink. They have it positive here. And then diesel, which is actually a different chemical. So if it's probably more of an energy sink. It's hard to say. And actually, when you go to biomass, the most productive biomass is still things like wood and wood chips, which still, and twigs and things are still used around the world in large quantities to heat homes, especially in poor areas and in rural areas. We believe that outside certain conditions, I'm up here on page 144, in the tropics, most ethanol EROI values are at or below the 3-to-1 extended EROI value required for a fuel to be minimally useful to society. I'll read that again. We believe that outside certain conditions in the tropics, most ethanol EROI values are below the 3-to-1 minimum value extended ERO value required for a fuel to be minimally useful. That means, like in Brazil, in the tropics, they're within that latitude of the tropics, they can grow energy beets or sugar cane, and it's above a 3-to-1 EROI in the tropics. Wind power has a high EROI value, with the mean or average perhaps as high as 18-to-1, as derived in the existing meta-analysis by Kubiszewski et al. 2010. Again, apologize for the name if you, Mr. or Mrs., I don't even know if it's a male or female. Kubiszewski watches my video. Even 20-to-1, N of 26 from 18 publications. See Lambert et al. 2012 for references, figure 3. We already went over that. The value in practice may be less due to the need for backup facilities. An examination of EROI literature on solar photovoltaic or PV energy generation shows differences in the assumptions and methodologies employed and the EROI values calculated. The values, assumptions, and parameters included are often ambiguous and differ from study to study, making comparisons between photovoltaic and other energy return on energy investment values difficult and fraught with potential pitfalls. Nevertheless, we calculated the mean energy return on energy investment value using data from 45 separate publications spanning several decades. These values resulted in a mean EROI value of roughly 10-to-1, N of 79 from 45 publications. See Lambert et al. 2012 for references, figure 3. It should be noted that several recent studies that have broader boundaries give ERO values of 2 to 3-to-1. Prieto and Hall 2012, Palmer 2013, Weisbach et al. 2013. Although these are not weighted for the higher quality of the electricity compared with thermal energy input, geothermal electricity production has a mean EROI of approximately 9-to-1, N of 30 from 11 publications. See Lambert et al. 2012, figure 3. A positive aspect of most renewable energies is that the output of these fuels is high-quality electricity. A potential drawback is that the output is far less reliable and predictable. ERI values for PV and other renewable alternatives are generally computed without converting the electricity generated into its primary energy equivalent. Kubiszewski, 2009. But also without including any considerable cost associated with the required energy backups or storage. EROI calculations of renewable energy technology appear to reflect some disagreement on the role of technological improvement. Eroi et al. Attribute some low published EROI values for PVs to the use of outdated data and direct energy output data that represents obsolete technology that is not interactive of more recent changes and improvements in PV technology. Eroi et al. 2012. EROI values that do reflect technological improvements are calculated by combining top-of-the-line technological specifications from contemporary commercially available models with energy output values obtained from experimental field data. Other researchers contend that values derived using this methodology do not represent adequately the actual, in parentheses, energy cost to society and the myriad energy costs associated with this delivery process. For example, Prieto and Hall, 2012, calculated EROI values that incorporate most energy costs, with the assumption that wherever money was spent, energy too was spent. They used data existing installations in Spain and derived EROI values of roughly 2.4 to 1, 2.4 to 1, considerably lower than many less comprehensive estimates. Similarly, low EROI values for rooftop photovoltaics with battery backup were found by Palmer 2015, although it should be noted that the output of both systems were high-quality electricity. Nearly all renewable energy systems appear to have relatively low EROI values when compared with conventional fossil fuels. That is crucial. Nearly all renewable energy systems, new energy systems, that's emphasizing the new energy systems, appear to have relatively low EROI values when compared with conventional fossil fuels. And that has tremendous consequences for humanity and all the flora and fauna on Earth. A question remains as to the degree to which total energy costs can be reduced in the future. But as it stands, most renewable energy systems appear to be still heavily supported by fossil fuels. This is absolutely critical, pivotal. I'm running out of adjectives, but I'll read that again. But as it stands, most renewable, in quotes, energy systems appear to still heavily supported by fossil fuels. These energy systems appear to be heavily supported by fossil fuels. So you can't have renewables without fossil fuels. They are just, you're really just converting fossil fuel energy into renewables to get a lower EROI, and the pollution is in the front end of construction and installation and not so much combustion. And if they have a positive energy return, you can't argue that it does reduce pollution, which to me is absolutely a critical problem that needs to be better addressed by humanity, is pollution. Nevertheless, they are considerably more efficient at turning fossil fuels into electricity than our thermal power plants, although it takes many years to get all the energy back. So, it might take you 8 years for that's just a number I made up, to get a solar voltaic panel, and the energy that went into building, installing, transporting it, the maintenance, the return, kind of like if you were investing in a business. You bought a chain of a small retail chain of boutiques. That's what people with masters in business calculate, and accountants with masters in accountancy. How many years, if I spend $10 million, do I get my $10 million back, adjusted for inflation and taxes and all that? What's my return time? In business schools, they do case studies where they do those calculations. Hopefully they do in a good business school. We summarize existing studies of EROI while attempting to understand the differences among them. Specifically, published values of EROI for similar fuels sometimes are substantially different, leading to large differences within the published data for EROI assessments. To reduce these differences, Murphy et al. 2011 derived a standard protocol for calculating EROI while recognizing the uncertainties involved in and inherent to all EROI calculations. Murphy et al. Proposed that these differences largely can be reduced when similar boundaries are used for the assessment. The generation of EROI values is best developed using industry or government-derived data on energy outputs and energy costs in physical units, or by using a process energy method based on measured energy costs of components. But more commonly, part or all of the data is only in financial units. Energy cost values can be derived from financial costs that can be translated into energy units using energy intensities, i.e., energy used as a per monetary unit for that type of activity. Unfortunately, most companies consider these costs proprietary knowledge. Different boundaries and variables differ between nations and may result in conflicting or inconsistent data. Lambert et al. 2013. Only a few countries, including the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Norway, and China, keep the necessary industry-specific estimates of energy costs required to perform an EROI analysis. Fortunately, this data, taken as a whole within a given country, seems to be relatively consistent with information available from various non-governmental sources, e.g., Gannon et al. Or the differences make logical sense. A short description of our methodology for each respective fuel follows. 3.1. Oil and gas EROI values are typically aggregated together. The reason is that since both are often extracted from the same wells. And here is a diagram here on the x-axis, global oil and gas EROI values and trends over 20 years. That's 1990, 2010. That's quite a long period. The green dot here is global gas, Gannon et al. 2009, and the black bar line here is global oil and gas trend line. Now, if you look at the trend, you can see that it has a negative down slope. So a curve fitting program, try not to use too technical of terms, but it's just a negative slope. It's going down. So the global and gas trend line, and this is EROI in the y-axis. So 0 here, 15 to 1, 30 to 1. So it actually improved. It was on an uptrend, and then it was kind of flat to down, and then then here around 1999 it began a downtrend and it's been consistently down. Now it's just above 15, and this is again oil and gas ERA values and trends. So that's really low tar sands, although it wasn't as big back then, but It has high EROI, Middle Eastern oil, and there's still some North American high yielding conventional EROI fields out there still producing oil with the lower producing ones, but they're all averaged together. Very good table. That's the trend. This is life and death of civilization right here. This is a matter of life and death. Your life, whoever's listening, and myself, all of us, this trend is going to affect all of our lives. If you're very wealthy, the pitchforks might come out for you eventually, as they say. That's a metaphor for the average folks and poor people rising up and attacking the rich. That's getting the pitchforks out. It could affect the rich. The poor may not be able to heat their homes anymore, as the prices may go up in certain parts of the world. And then they start to riot and protest. We have what's called a yellow vest, gilet jaune. That means yellow vest in French. They are rioting. Their production costs and capital operations are typically combined, and therefore the energy inputs of EROI calculations are very difficult to separate. I've tried to do some research on this on my own, and it is difficult because a lot of the knowledge, the facts are withheld. But there are enough facts out there, he says, to establish a trend. And this is a collaborative paper. Obtaining reliable data on global petroleum production and associated investment costs can be very difficult, since most production is from national oil companies like Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company, and Kuwait and United Arab Emirates and all those countries. And Iran, they all keep it secret, excuse me. Whose records tend not to be public. Gannon et al. Estimated global oil and gas EROI from 1992 to 2006 using data from the most publicly traded oil companies summarized by John Herald Company, Cleveland et al., 1984, Hall et al., 1986, and Guilford et al. 2011 used time series data for oil and gas production in the United States from several sources, mostly the U.S. Energy Information Agency, excuse me, and Consensus of Mineral Industries, going back to 1919. Relatively good time series data is available for Norway, Grandel et al. 2011, Mexico, Ramirez in Preparation, Canada, Fries 2011, Poisson and Hall in Press, and China, Hu et al. 2011 and 13. 3.2 coal. We evaluate the EROI subscript ST for U.S. and Chinese coal, two of the world's largest producers. For both nations, direct energy gains and costs were derived in physical and energy units available from government sources. Below et al. Unpublished data, Hu et al. 2013. In the U.S. analysis, direct energy consumption and direct costs were derived from physical and financial data published in the United States Census of Mineral Industries and United States Economic Census Reports, various years, 1919 through 2007. Direct energy consumption was converted from physical units to joules, and the energy equivalent of the indirect monetary costs were derived using the average energy intensity for the entire economy for a given year multiplied by the nominal dollar cost. A sensitivity analysis for China was derived using the energy intensity for all engineering sectors. See Hu et al. 2013 for details. Table 1. Published EROI values for various fuel sources and regions, adapted from Murphy et al. 2011. In the left column it says resource, then the next one over is year, then the country. Here is EROI X semicolon 1 and reference. So this third, well, I guess it's the fourth column here, has the EROIs. And you can see it varies here. 65 for Canada, oil and gas production back in the year 1970. That's interesting. Natural gas, the low one here is Canada 2009 at 20, and freeze is the source there. Nuclear, it's got nothing. U.S. 5 to 15. Holland Day, it's pretty low, 5 to 15. I mean, for all the, although it's very energy dense, nuclear, so it doesn't have much of a footprint. It doesn't use up a lot of land or farmland or anything. And there have been very few people injured. It's the safest form of probably, if you take into all the people that have been injured, coal mining and transporting petroleum around, and even with Fukushima and that kind of thing, it still may be the best. And we can use newer reactors that are safe. Pretty much fail. They can't even do harm if they want to do. Renewables, hydropower. Here you had in 1984 they claimed over 100. There's nothing for wave energy and wind turbine there. Solar collectors, flat plate. Look how low that is. Converting collector 1.6. Photovoltaic, in reality, in a sunny climate, it's only about 2.4 to 1. That's there's been a lot. People just don't want to see real quality studies on that because there's a lot of people with a lot of this is political. There's huge money, and people and their jobs are connected with energy policy because it's a big part of the economy. And in the employment aspect, I'm just talking employment. And if you were to show that photovoltaics, let's say where I live at the 39th 40 latitude, our energy sinks and it's really only good in tropics, then there's all the people and their jobs connected to photovoltaics. You know, in Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, the Great Lakes, which is the most populous productive part of the United States, is the Great Lakes conglomeration, and that whole conglomeration, people stop buying photovoltaics and buy mini windmills or something for their farms or land because it's has a positive EROI, you know, because we do have some wind here. Biomass, ethanol, it has energy sink to as high as 10. There's a big gap there between studies. Corn, even the highest end studies still basically it's below 3 or 4, which means it's not worth doing. It's probably doing more harm than good. The corn-based ethanol, we should use that to grow soybeans to feed people and animals. Biodiesel, only 1.3. That was Pimentel pretty recently, 2005. Okay. 4 results. EROI for various fuels varies all the way from below 1 to over 100 to 1, with in general the highest values being for coal in the U.S. and oil and gas from 1970 to 1990. There is a tendency for EROI for oil and gas production to increase during earlier years of development and then decline over time with rate of exploitation. They get the easiest to reach fruit first. And then you have to start climbing the tree or using a ladder and special tools to get the apples, the pears, the peaches down. We organized existing published and unpublished EROI values by fuel type, year, and individual study. This information presented in Table 1 summarizes Our existing knowledge of EROIs for various energy sources by EROI value, geographic region, and time. 4.1 Global Oil and Gas Petroleum. The EROI for petroleum production appears to be declining over time for every place we have data. Gannon et al. 2009 were able to generate an approximate global EROI for private oil and gas companies using the upstream financial database maintained and provided by John H. Herald Company. These results indicate that the EROI for publicly traded global oil and gas was approximately 23 to 1 in 1992. It rose to 33 to 1 in 1990 and then dropped sharply to 18 to 1 in 2005. This domed-shaped pattern seems to occur wherever there is a long enough data set, perhaps as a result of initial technological improvements being trumped in time by depletion. So as they make profits from the high return, they reinvest it in better technology and equipment and bring in engineers that are highly educated, knowledgeable, experienced people. They get better at it. They begin to extract more efficiently and faster, but then ultimately it's a non-renewable resource, and then they start, the depletion or running out. That's what they were saying there. 4.11 United States oil and gas. 3 independent estimates of EROI time series for oil and gas production for the United States are given in Figure 5, along with some important oil-related historical events. Cleveland et al., 1984, Hall et al., 1986, Guilford et al., 2011. The data show a general pattern of increase and then decline in EROI over time, except as impacted by changes in exploration drilling intensity. In, for example, the late 1970s and early 1980s, during the mid-1970s and 80s and the late 2000s, the price of oil increased, as did exploration intensity, as measured by increased feet drilled and energy used. EROI values tend to decline when there is an increase in the energy required for exploration and drilling. But usually, increased drilling has linked to little or no additional oil discoveries. Hence, EROI values declined. The greatly increased amount of money being spent for oil and gas development in the U.S. in recent years suggests that despite the recent increases in production, the EROI may continue to decline. That is real important. The greatly increased amount of money being spent for oil and gas development in the United States of America in recent years suggests that despite the recent increases in production, the energy return on energy investment may continue to decline. 4.1.2 Canada and oil and gas. 2 independent EROI estimates for Canadian production of oil and gas. Blue line from Freeze 2011, Figure 7, and oil and gas tar sands combined. Red line from the Poison in the press demonstrate that EROI of conventional oil and gas in Canada has declined considerably in recent decades. Freeze 2011 estimates the EROI of Western Canadian conventional oil and gas over a time period from 1947 to 2010. Freeze agrees with Poison that the later values are probably more accurate. Poison and Hall found that the EROI of conventional oil and gas has decreased since the mid-1990s from roughly 20 to 1 to 12 to 1, a 40% decline. EROI of conventional combined oil gas tar sands has also decreased during the same period. from 14 to 1 to 7.5 to 1, a decline of 46%. Poisson and Hall in press. Poisson and Hall estimated EROI values for Canadian oil and gas are about half those calculated by Freeze, and the rate of decline is somewhat less rapid. Freeze 2011, Poisson and Hall in press, figure 8. Poisson and Hall estimate of the EROI of tar sands is relatively low. Conservatively, that means it's probably not that high, 4.5 estimate, using only the front end of the life cycle. Incorporating tar sands into total oil and gas estimates decreases the EROI of oil and gas extraction industry as a whole. Poisson and Hall in press. These estimates would lower if more elements of the full life cycle environmental impact were included in the calculation. 4.1.3 Norwegian oil and gas. Norwegian conventional oil and gas fields are relatively new and remain profitable both financially and with regard to energy production. Grendal et al. 2011 estimate that the EROI of oil and gas ranged from 44 to 1 during the early 1990s. It rose to 59 to 1 in 1996 to approximately 40 to 1 during the latter half of the last decade. Mexican oil and gas. Ramirez trends for the EROI of Mexican oil and gas suggests that this country may have peaked twice in the past decade. The EROI for conventional oil and gas production in Mexico declined from roughly 60 to 1 in the year 2000 to 47 to 1 the following year, but returned. This chart here says U.S. oil and gas value trends, and you can see the slope is down from maybe 16 here, and this dot is barely 11 to 1. So that's very important, as 15 to 17 is where an advanced and mechanized industrial civilization with higher education and a large military and such needs. So our production is below that, which means other parts of the civilization, energy will have to come out of them to go into the military and the hospitals, maybe less entertainment or tourism, and these things are subtle and kind of hard to detect, but like an organism, the higher priority organs will get the energy, and it'll happen in the microcosm of a big country of over 330 million people. U.S. oil and gas values published by Guilford et al. From 1992 to 2007. Published ERI values for oil and production in the United States, and we have in the light blue here U.S. oil and gas, in the orange U.S. oil and gas, and in the violet U.S. oil and gas. And these are 1984, 1986, and 2011. So let's just see what's going on with the most recent one. Published values goes up here, down. Eisenhower imposes oil import quota. U.S. oil market control ends in 1971 or 2. U.S. oil import quota eased. North Slope oil production peak. So that was way back in like 92, I'll say. North Slope oil. So Alaska's seen a consistent decline in oil. Then we had the war in Iraq and gained better control of some oil there in the Middle East that's high EROI, but that doesn't really affect the domestic. Record drilling it has these arrows here over this period, kind of in the 70s into the late 80s, and then low drilling, and now we're in like the biggest drilling frenzy of all time in 2018-19. Time series analysis of oil and gas production within the U.S., including several relevant oil-related historical events. Each analysis demonstrates a pattern of general increase, then decline in EROI with additional impact of increased exploration and drilling. So the trend here in the mid-60s seems to be from there. That was kind of a peak in EROI. And these are the trend, of the one that goes the longest is definitely been a downtrend. Charles Hall et al. Energy Policy 64. This shows Canadian oil and gas, the freeze study, and it rose, and it was up around 70 or so this year, and then from there it's fallen. Now it's probably in the mid-teens. That's for all types of oil and gas. And then there's a smaller study here by Poisson and Hall, and it shows a small downward trend here, a slope, even if you connect the beginning to the end overall. And then that's quite old. We don't have I think things have changed a lot in the last 5 years or so. 2 independent estimates of EROI for Canadian petroleum production, oil and gas. Let's see the values and trends here. Here's the aqua blue. It's flat down slightly, and that is for Canadian oil and gas. 1990 or so into the 2006 or 7, it was slightly down. The frizz study is definitely on a down slope. So that's a pretty big deal. New assessments of EROI of oil and gas from various countries. You have Norway in the orange, and its EROI is on a downtrend there. The Pemex, that's the oil company of Mexico, on a downtrend there. China, also on a downtrend. And Norway, in blue, is on a definite downtrend from over in the low 30s to looks like maybe 20 or so, and then that's quite a while back. Here we have Canada and Pennsylvania, 2011. So Pennsylvania is the orange, I'll say, or rust color. It seems to be trending down. Use least square analysis type thing. And then Canada here, again, the EROI, which is pretty good. Here back in the 90s, well above 25 into the 30s maybe, and then back, into the low 20s here. So the trends are negative, or downsloping. And then this is U.S. coal, and it just has some dots. That's the EROI, still quite high, 50 here, 100 here. That was back in 1960. 1969 maybe was 50. In the late 80s here, it was still 75. China, their coal there was up to 25 at its peak. The most recent, at least here, let's say 2008, it was still like 23, 24. But to 59 to 1 by 2013. This was followed by a steady decline over the next 6 years, dropping to 45 to 1 by 2009. That's not a very long period of time. The collapse of production from the Cantarell field in the Gulf of Mexico, once the world's second largest, appears largely responsible for this decline. So it's just depletion. Chinese oil and gas, the Eroi of the Tangking field, China's largest conventional oil field, has declined continuously from 10 to 1 to 6 to 1. So their largest field is being depleted, and they're requiring more equipment to get the last of the oil out. Dry natural gas. The data represented in Figure 10 includes analysis of a portion of the U.S. and for all of Canada. Since most published numbers combine data on natural gas with that of oil, it is usually difficult or impossible to assess the production cost of these fossil fuel resources independently. Sell et al.'s 2011 Trends for Eroi of Natural Gas in Pennsylvania, United States has an undulating decline from roughly 120 to 1 in 1986 to 67 to 1 in 2003. This value is probably a high value as some important indirect costs are not calculated. Freeze estimated the Eroi of Western Canadian natural gas from 1993 to 2009 and found the Eroi of natural gas has been decreasing since 1993 through 2006 from roughly 38 all the way down to 14. This trend shifted in 2006 as exploitation intensity declined, resulting in a steady increase in Eroi of roughly 20 to 1 by 2009. Figure 10, Freeze, 2011, Alcott and Melino found values similar to Sell et al. For fracked shale gas from Pennsylvania, from presumably sweet spots. Alrighty, I'm going to take a break here. That was part 2. Au revoir.